Why most advice sounds good, but quietly ruins lives. Welcome to Vantage, Aditya. There is something deeply dangerous about advice that sounds beautiful. Most people assume bad advice will sound foolish, reckless, or obviously harmful. But that is rarely how life works. The advice that destroys the most lives usually sounds intelligent, inspiring, and emotionally comforting. That is exactly why people trust it. And because they trust it, they stop questioning it. Over time, these ideas slowly shape careers, relationships, ambitions, identities, and entire futures. Not through one dramatic mistake, but through thousands of small decisions that quietly move life in the wrong direction. The frightening part is that many people never realize their suffering began with an idea that sounded wise. Stay till the end, because this video will completely change the way one listens to advice forever. Argument 1. Human beings prefer comforting advice over accurate advice. Human beings are emotional creatures before they are rational thinkers. When advice is heard, the mind does not immediately ask whether the advice is true. The mind first asks whether the advice feels emotionally satisfying. This is why comforting advice spreads faster than truthful advice. Truth often creates discomfort because truth forces reflection. Comforting advice removes discomfort instantly, and emotional relief feels good. When someone says that everything happens for a reason, the statement creates emotional comfort. When someone says that one should simply follow passion, the statement creates emotional excitement. When someone says that one should ignore all criticism and believe in oneself, the statement creates emotional strength. But emotionally satisfying advice is not automatically intelligent advice. Sometimes it is incomplete. Sometimes it is unrealistic. And sometimes it becomes dangerous when applied blindly. Argument 2. Most advice fails because it ignores context. One of the biggest problems with modern advice is that it treats every life as if it operates under the same conditions. Reality does not work that way. Different people carry different responsibilities, risks, personalities, opportunities, and limitations. Advice that creates freedom for one person may create disaster for another. When a wealthy entrepreneur says that one should quit the job and chase the dream, the advice sounds inspiring. But that entrepreneur may already possess financial security, industry connections, reputation, or a safety net. Another person following the same advice may experience years of instability, debt, and anxiety. The advice sounded identical. The outcomes became completely different. This is why universal advice is dangerous. Reality is never universal. Reality is contextual, and advice without context often becomes disguised irresponsibility. Argument 3. Motivation creates emotional energy, not long-term stability. Motivational advice creates a temporary emotional high. That emotional high often feels powerful enough to change life. A person watches an inspiring speech and suddenly feels unstoppable. The mind wants dramatic transformation immediately. The person wants to quit the job, rebuild life, launch a business, cut people off, or reinvent identity overnight. But emotional intensity disappears faster than consequences. Eventually, motivation fades. Reality does not. Bills continue arriving. Responsibilities continue existing. Fear continues returning. This does not mean ambition is wrong. This means emotional excitement alone is not a strategy. Many people confuse emotional stimulation with real progress. But motivation without planning often creates destruction disguised as courage. Argument 4. The advice industry rewards simplicity instead of accuracy. Modern platforms reward advice that sounds simple, absolute, and emotionally powerful. Nuanced truth rarely goes viral because nuanced truth requires thinking. Simple advice spreads because it feels instantly understandable. Statements like, "never give up," "always trust yourself" or "work hard and success will come" sound powerful because they remove complexity. But real life is filled with complexity. Sometimes giving up is intelligent. Sometimes trusting oneself blindly becomes dangerous. Sometimes hard work produces exhaustion instead of success. Sometimes criticism contains valuable truth. But complex advice does not create emotional certainty. Simple advice does. And certainty is addictive. This creates a dangerous culture where confidence begins replacing wisdom. People start trusting statements based on emotional impact instead of practical accuracy. Argument 5. The advice to follow passion has quietly confused millions of people. Few pieces of advice sound more inspiring than the phrase "follow your passion." The statement sounds beautiful because it promises meaning, purpose, and happiness. But the advice often creates confusion instead of clarity. Passion is unstable. Human emotions constantly change. What excites a person today may become exhausting later. Some passions create financial opportunities. Other passions remain hobbies forever. Some people develop passion only after becoming skilled at something. This means passion is not always the starting point. Sometimes passion is the result of mastery. Many people spend years searching for a magical passion while ignoring practical opportunities that could have created growth, confidence, and stability. This creates paralysis. The person keeps waiting to feel certain before acting. Life quietly moves forward, while the person keeps searching for emotional certainty that may never arrive. Argument 6. The advice to always be yourself sounds wise until reality appears. Modern culture constantly repeats the phrase, "be yourself." The statement sounds empowering because it encourages authenticity. But the advice becomes dangerous when interpreted carelessly. Not every natural instinct deserves expression. Not every personality trait deserves protection. Growth often requires changing parts of oneself. A person with poor communication skills cannot simply say that "this is just who I am." A leader cannot refuse emotional discipline and call it authenticity. A person who lacks responsibility cannot hide behind self-expression forever. The strongest individuals are not those who remain exactly the same. The strongest individuals are those willing to evolve intentionally. Real growth requires adaptation, and adaptation often feels uncomfortable because it demands change. Argument 7. The advice to ignore critics quietly destroys self-awareness. People love hearing the phrase "ignore the haters." The statement feels empowering because criticism hurts emotionally. But criticism is not always hatred. Sometimes criticism is information. Some criticism is unfair and destructive. But some criticism reveals blind spots that friends are too afraid to mention. People who ignore every critic eventually lose connection with reality. The smartest individuals do not absorb every opinion emotionally, but they also do not reject feedback automatically. They evaluate it carefully, because wisdom requires reflection, and reflection becomes impossible when every uncomfortable opinion is dismissed as negativity. Argument 8. Hard work alone does not guarantee success. This may be one of the most emotionally attractive beliefs ever created. Work hard, and success will come. The statement feels morally satisfying because it creates the illusion of fairness. People want to believe effort always gets rewarded. But reality is more complicated. Hard work matters enormously, but direction matters too. Timing matters. Strategy matters. Environment matters. Relationships matter. A person climbing the wrong mountain with extreme effort still reaches the wrong destination. This does not mean effort is useless. It means effort without awareness becomes wasteful. The most successful people are not always the hardest workers. Very often, they are the clearest thinkers. Argument 9. Society often gives advice that protects comfort instead of growth. Many forms of advice are designed to preserve social comfort. People say safe things because safe things avoid conflict. That is why society encourages predictability. Society praises stability because stability feels safe collectively. But growth often requires discomfort. Growth requires questioning norms. Growth requires risk. Growth requires uncertainty. The problem is that socially accepted advice is not always designed to help individuals maximize potential. Sometimes it is designed to maintain order, and there is a difference between those two things. Argument 10. The most dangerous advice is advice that removes responsibility. Any advice that makes a person feel completely powerless should immediately create caution. When people hear statements like, "Success is all luck," "Rich people are evil," or "Life is unfair anyway," the statements create emotional relief, because now failure no longer feels personal. Responsibility disappears. But responsibility is the foundation of growth. A person cannot improve a life that feels completely controlled by external forces. This does not mean life is perfectly fair. It means power begins the moment responsibility begins. And advice that removes responsibility quietly removes personal power. Argument 11. Intelligent people do not follow advice blindly. Highly intelligent individuals rarely accept advice immediately. They examine it. They test it against reality. They ask deeper questions. Who gave this advice? Under what conditions did it work? What risks exist? What context is missing? What consequences might appear later? Intelligent people understand that even good advice can become dangerous when applied in the wrong situation. Wisdom is not the ability to collect advice. Wisdom is the ability to filter advice correctly. Argument 12. The real skill is learning how to think. Not learning what to think. Most people spend life collecting opinions from others, but very few people develop independent thinking. Independent thinking requires discomfort because it forces uncertainty. The person must evaluate ideas personally instead of borrowing conclusions emotionally. That process takes effort, but it creates clarity. And clarity becomes one of the most valuable advantages in modern life, because the world is filled with people repeating advice they never truly examined themselves. Argument 13. The final realization. Most advice is not dangerous because it sounds bad. Most advice is dangerous because it sounds good. That is why people trust it emotionally before examining it logically. The goal is not to reject all advice. The goal is to stop consuming advice passively. Every idea should be examined carefully. Every belief should be tested against reality. Because one sentence heard at the wrong moment can quietly shape an entire future. And sometimes the difference between a fulfilled life and a regret-filled life begins with one question. Is this advice actually wise, or does it simply sound good? If this perspective changed the way one thinks, then this channel is doing its job. Subscribe to Vantage Aditya for ideas that challenge assumptions and sharpen perception.